Hi everyone, I'm Tessa Brown. I'm the Provincial Silviculture Performance Assessment Specialist with the Forest Science Planning and Practices branch. This is the first video in the What's New 2023 training series. This three-part series is intended for people who weren't implementing the 2022 manual last year. I outline all the changes that have been introduced since 2020. I broke it into 3 videos. This first video covers an introduction plus sections 1 to 6 and section 10. The second video covers sections 7 and 8. The third video covers the alternative survey methods, so section 9. Last year was a transition year. I know many surveyors did adopt the 2022 manual, so at this point they should be fairly comfortable with the changes. There have been some small updates since then, so you'll want to watch the condensed What's New 2023 Changes Since 2022 video. Thanks for joining. All right, before we get going, please make sure you're notifying your coworkers, clients, contractors, etc., that there are significant changes to BC's silviculture survey procedures. It'd be very helpful if you could share a link to this YouTube channel and to the survey's website with them. I'd highly recommend reviewing the changes during your survey's pre-work to ensure everyone is aware and understands the changes. Also, please make sure you're referencing the 2023 manual in your survey contracts. For timing, the new changes come into effect on April 3rd. All surveys completed after this date must follow the new survey manual to ensure reporting compliance. We will also be releasing new REIS documents, the Results Information Submission Specifications. Our planned release is slightly delayed. Results has experienced significant functionality issues lately, and our results specialists need to prioritize the repairs given its prime reporting season right now. But as a heads up, the new REIS documents will apply for surveys completed after April 3rd. If you still need to report surveys completed prior to April 3rd, 2023, they can align with the old REIS documents. If you haven't already, please check out the BC Silviculture Surveys website. It has been fully updated. The 2020 and 2022 manual and cards no longer apply, so they have been taken down. In their place, there is now a new 2023 Silviculture Survey Procedures Manual. There is also a 2023 What's New document. The PDF cards have all been updated and are posted except for the FS657, where there are no changes. Given the extent of the updates, if you'd like to now take a silviculture course or the exam, the schedule is up to date and posted in the accreditation program and exam section. You can also find links to the What's New video training sessions at the bottom. Lastly, they're not quite ready, but we will soon be releasing self-calculating Excel templates to help you survey complex vertical stands. They will work for multi-storied, DFP, and layered surveys, so stay tuned for that. If you're more of a visual learner, I've also been creating some short field videos covering the key changes to silviculture survey procedures. You can find everything on the BC Silviculture Surveys YouTube channel. I'm really hoping to build it out this year. I want to prioritize making training videos on forest health and some of the harder alternative survey methodologies like DFP, multi-storied, and layered surveys. If you have any other ideas for content or if you'd like to submit some forest health video clips, please reach out. I'd love to chat. If you're checking out the survey's website, you can download a digital copy of all the field cards, the FS657, 8, 9, 660, the 1138A. You'll also be able to soon download Excel templates for the data collection and compilation for multi-storied, layered, and DFP surveys. If you're a SNAP or SAP user, those apps can handle all of the changes. So if you've done updates over the last year, you should be good to go. If you need paper cards, the 2023 versions should be ready any day for ordering. So just follow up with the Victoria Distribution Center. Their information is linked in the surveys manual and on the What's New document. All right, so like I just mentioned, we are releasing new 2023 versions of the FS658, FS659, and 660. So what should you do with your old cards? Well, if you still have the 2020 versions, unfortunately, you will need to throw them out. They are not compatible at all with the new procedures. Then if you have the 2022 cards, you should be okay. You don't need to reorder the FS658 or FS659s. Use them up. The 2022 versions can work. For 2023, we basically just added 2 new columns where you can record the stratum or data types leading and secondary species. It's often different between the inventory and silviculture layers and between layers 1, 2, 3, and 4. We found that the cards were getting messy and the students were sometimes getting confused over what the data meant. So I think the 2023 cards are more user-friendly, but they aren't critical if you still have 2022 cards and if they worked well for you. Then for the FS660, if you're putting an order in, I would definitely get it. It's only $5 and there have been quite a few changes over the last year. All right, before we dive into the changes, I do want to remind everyone that this is just a guidance document. There are no legislative requirements to use the procedures outlined in the manual. You can follow different methodologies as long as the outcome is similar, comparable to what would be achieved following this manual. The manual simply helps ensure that you can meet the legislative reporting requirements that are outlined in the results information submission specifications documents. So for example, I'm going to talk about collecting heights and ages every 4 plots at your full measure plots. If you're doing a regen delay survey on a large stratum and every tree is within a few centimeters of each other, that would be overkill. You could do fewer samples and end up with the same outcome to what would be achieved following the manual. So that would be absolutely fine. Okay, I also want to highlight the formatting of the manual. For the past few years, the manual has used purple text boxes to indicate best management practices, BMPs. It's also used blue text boxes to indicate newly revised or commonly misunderstood issues. Given the extent of changes, I couldn't possibly put text boxes around every single edit. So instead, for any procedural change or new text that I wanted to highlight, I used red or green font. In 2022, I used red font. In 2023, I used green font. I also want to point out one helpful tip for navigating the document. In some sections, it feels like every other word is linked to the glossary or a different section of the manual. If you click on the link and then want to navigate back to your original place in the document, simply hold Alt and the left arrow key. All right, let's get going on the changes, starting off with Section 2, Survey Principles. All right, let's begin with Section 2.11. On page 14, we introduced 2 new best management practices related to regeneration delay, planting, and forest health. We are asking licensees to avoid declaring regeneration delay met at the time of planting if you suspect survival will be poor. For example, if you're planting into an area with historically high cattle damage, or if you're planting in the middle of a heat wave. This is important so that we can capture the forest health factors and the surviving forest cover, since it's used for growth and yield modeling. If there's a complete species shift following planting, the models need to reflect that. Now, sometimes you don't expect any issues and you do declare off planting, but something happens and you end up with a significant shift in the forest cover inventory by the time you do your survival survey. If that's the case, we're asking, not requiring, you to do another forest cover submission. If you want the best data being used for timber supply review, this is important. Okay, on page 15, there is a text box under the free growing survey timing section. It captures best management practices to limit the risk of rejection of a declaration. I added 2 new best management practices. The first one, time your free growing surveys to maximize the identification of forest health factors. Consider the age of the stand and the month of the survey. For example, with rust, it's advantageous to wait until the rust expression is at its peak and to time the survey for sporulation season. If you have any questions about timing surveys to maximize the identification of forest health factors, please reach out to your regional forest pathologist or entomologist. If you don't know who they are, send me an email and I'll put you in touch with them. Second BMP. It is advisable to do a stalking survey sometime relatively early in stand development. That way, if you find a forest health problem, you actually have time to fix it before free growing. And then I guess third point, I also just noted that a stand needs to conform to the stalking standards 20 years after the commencement date or 5 years after the completion of the last brushing or spacing treatment if they are carried out more than 15 years after the commencement date. So it's just something to keep in mind. Next, section 3, preparing for a survey. There are very few changes in this section, so it'll be quick. Okay, let's start with section 3.1, file review. This is just a reminder, it's nothing new. When you're doing your file review in preparation for a survey, you need to check if your block overlaps with a spatially explicit Government Action Regulation Order, a GAR order. If you haven't been provided anything in your survey package, ask the licensee if it's because there are no overlaps, or if they expect you to look it up yourself. This is critical because some GAR orders address factors that stocking standards may not. And GAR orders supersede stocking standards, so you may need to do a site plan amendment, or you may simply need to collect extra survey information to ensure the GAR general wildlife measures are being met. So here's a quick example. The Caribou Region's GAR orders have general wildlife measures that address pre- and post-harvest Douglas fir composition levels. So when you're compiling your survey data and you're checking if you have adequate preferred and acceptable well-spaced trees at regeneration delay, you would also want to make sure that you meet the general wildlife measure for Douglas fir composition. If you want more information specifically on the Caribou Region's GAR, please reach out to Shelley Barlow. She is the silviculture specialist for this region, and she does have some additional documentation on this. Next, 3.42. So this section covers the procedures for the assessment of vegetation competition. It looks different from previous years. I reorganized it to remove some out-of-date sections and to improve the flow of information, but nothing has actually changed. There's no changes to the procedures. Next, cannibal conifers. In this section, I just added a BMP text box highlighting that you do not need to collect cannibal conifer data if there isn't a maximum density in your stocking standards, or if you're clearly below the maximum density. Don't waste your time. I expect there will be an increasing number of stocking standards provincially without a maximum density threshold, given the 2022 Chief Forester memo. If you're a silviculture forester and you haven't seen it yet, check it out. It's posted on the Silviculture Surveys Reference Documents webpage. It recommends omitting or removing any reference to maximum density thresholds in stocking standards for even age stands. So surveyors, make sure that you're carefully reviewing the latest stocking standards to see if there's maximum density. In section 3.5.1.1, covering SIBEC, I added an example of calculating site index using SIBEC on a mosaic site. I showed how to do a proportional average based on the percent area for each site series. I also removed the old section, leading species issues when determining site index. It advised to pick the secondary species or the silviculture species if the leading inventory species was unsuitable for growth intercept or SIBEC. However, the VRI is very much assuming that we are submitting the leading species, so we really can't do that. They was horrified when they realized that we had been previously encouraging it. So instead, if growth intercept and SIBEC are unavailable, we will need to resort to site class conversion. Table 19 in the surveys manual covers most conifer and brawley species. Alternatively, you can use the species conversion table in the FS 660. It's found in section 32. I have a little screenshot shown on this slide. Next, section 3.6. This covers basal area forest cover requirements. This isn't anything new. This came into effect in 2016, but it's an area of major noncompliance. I'll be covering this again more thoroughly in the section 9 presentation. Basically, if you have more than 5 meters square per hectare of basal area, or if your site plan requires that a specific basal area per hectare be retained post-harvest, then you must report basal area under a Layer 1 inventory component. You can't just submit basal area under your normal I and S layers and results. That does not meet your legal reporting obligations. You have to submit a completely separate Layer 1 inventory where all the data relates only to the Layer 1 trees. So this is a great example. All this data is specific to the Layer 1 trees. This SU also had a Layer 4 and a Layer 4S reported. So this SU met its reporting obligations. For the minimum stratum size section, I just added a few extra details. For example, I included the definition for contiguous and understocked from the forest cover stratification and milestone declarations document. A contiguous area is less than 20 meters from the nearest understocked area, and an understocked area is greater than 20 meters wide throughout its length. I also emphasize that EPPR 4611 and the forest cover stratification document do not apply to woodlots because they fall under the Woodlot License Planning and Practices Regulation. I also want to highlight a document that was released in 2022. It's a follow-up to the 2007 Forest Cover Stratification and Milestone Declarations document. It's called Using Stratification to Achieve Non-Timber Values. The main messaging of this document is that not all broadleaf trees or patches of broadleaf trees need to be removed to favor conifer production. You can retain broadleaf patches and strips aligned with a PPR 4611 to meet non-timber objectives. If you want to learn more, there is a presentation posted on the YouTube channel, and the document is posted on the Silviculture Survey's reference documents webpage. Next up, sampling principles. This is really important to cover given the changes in procedures. Peter Ott, our senior biometrician, will also make a video specifically on this subject, so I'm not going too in depth. All right, first we have sampling intensity. We made a small wording tweak. In the past, the manual said that the minimum number of plots was 5 and the max was 1.5 plots per hectare. Now it says that there is no expectation to go over 1.5 plots per hectare unless the stratum is less than 3 hectares. We also emphasize in this section the importance of stratification. More plots does not replace the need for proper stratification, but equally, a lower sampling intensity cannot be done without adequate stratification. The manual also stresses that you should not strictly think about thresholds like the MSS or max density when selecting a sampling intensity. You also need to think about the variability of the population. If the inventory species composition, density, or basal area are variable, you should go at a higher sampling intensity to properly reflect the stand conditions. All right, for the sampling method section, I just tried to emphasize the importance of choosing an appropriate sampling method for the complexity of the stratum. The higher the complexity, the higher the need for a structured sample. When considering complexity, you need to consider both silviculture and inventory attributes. For the inventory attributes, it could be helpful to consider the distribution of total stems and species. Is it uniform, random, or clumped? If your population is on the random or clump side of the spectrum, like this image, you'll need to use a higher sampling intensity with a more structured sample. I also just want to emphasize that statistical theory is based on having a random sample or a systematic sample with a random start, and all plots need to have an equal chance of being selected. So truly, just follow your grid. It's not helping anyone by moving plots, it just introduces bias. So if your plot lands in a salmonberry pit, like right here, with almost no trees, do the plot. If your plot lands in the drip line, like this one right here, do it. If your plot lands in a creamy piece of ground where the planter is clearly planted over target, do it. If your plot lands in heavy slash adjacent to the road, do it. The only time you can move your plot is if there's a serious safety issue or if it lands in a non-productive area. All right, so I've received quite a few questions, all of the same theme. Like, should I shift or drop my plot if it doesn't land in a representative area? Or what should I do if my calculated inventory species composition is different from what I would have ocularly estimated? Should I adjust it? The answer for both is no. We need to make sure that we're following the grid and just reporting what you collect. Don't move plots and don't adjust your species composition. And again, I will be looking at different measures of dispersion that can be auto-calculated based on the tree tallies by species. So for the example in this picture, we could then communicate to the program areas that there's small but very dense patches of aspen within our spruce stand. I mentioned a few times that you should use a more structured survey in complex stands. So grid sampling has the most structure, followed by vector, then representative, and then visual assessments. No matter what method you use, you still need to meet the results information submission specification precision standards. If you can't meet them, you should be using a more structured sample. Similarly, if you can't achieve a comparable outcome to a grid sample while doing representative sampling, you should stop and go to a more structured sample. The manual now has more detailed guidance on when representative sampling and visual assessments are appropriate. They can be suitable if being conducted by highly skilled and knowledgeable surveyors with many years of related experience, who are also up to date on the latest methodologies. They are appropriate for your non-legal intermediate stalking surveys. For example, if you want to use a drone to map out a brushing treatment, that's fantastic. Or if you want to check on the efficacy of a treatment, or just do a check-in on a block before free growing, all very reasonable uses of a visual assessment. The Office of the Chief Forester is most concerned about the use of these sampling methods for free growing declarations. When used at free growing, they should be restricted to low-risk strata. A low-risk strata is clearly free growing with a recent plot survey, low forest health incidence and hazard, low basal area, and low species diversity. The only exception would be if there's a serious safety or access issue. For example, if you're on the mid-coast and there's no helipads or tow-in spots, and it's not possible to walk in from another block, road, or the beach, then of course you're going to need to use a helicopter or a drone to survey the block. Recently, I've been developing a matrix to help surveyors assess whether or not a visual assessment is appropriate for a free-growing survey. This will provide professionals a way to demonstrate their due diligence. If a professional chooses to disregard the recommendations of the matrix, that's fine. They can just write a short professional rationale explaining why a visual assessment is needed or why it's appropriate. In their rationale, they can explain what steps they'll take to minimize risk and ensure they can meet their legal requirements. Right now, I just have a draft version. I've been making updates based on feedback. If you've yet to provide any feedback and you use visual assessments, then please reach out. I'd be happy to go over this with you and allow you to test it out and then get that feedback in. I would also like to include best management practices for completing visual assessments in the 2024 version of the Surveys Manual. I already have a fair number drafted covering pre-harvest considerations, the last survey, surveyor qualifications, office preparation, survey planning, the process itself, calibration, data review, self-audits, and record keeping. If you would like to provide some of your BMPs that help you reduce risks associated with visual assessments, I have 2 feedback forms. You can scan the QR codes on this slide to access them. All right, next we have section 10 covering accreditation and training. After all this training, if you want to learn about the accreditation process and maybe become an accredited surveyor, I'd recommend reviewing the accreditation brochure and performance objective document. It's posted on the Silviculture Surveys website under the accreditation programs and exams section. The brochure is incredibly important because it outlines the 26 performance objectives that you need to demonstrate during the exam to become accredited. If there are exam criteria that you're not comfortable meeting, that's what you should focus your studying and training on in advance of the exam. If there are a few specific POs that you'd like me to cover in a YouTube video, send me an email. Now, training courses are also a great way to prepare. There's courses happening this spring in Sorrento, Parksville, and Prince George. All the instructors indicated that they were open to adding additional dates and locations if there is sufficient interest. These courses can't run unless there's adequate numbers, so if you're interested, I strongly advise signing up early. The new procedures will be taught in these courses, and the accreditation exam will require you to use them. I'll be posting a fall schedule probably in July or August, so stay tuned. Whether you're an accredited surveyor or not, it's important to stay up to date. So great job watching this video and learning about the new methodologies. There's other things that you can do to make sure that you stay current on an annual basis. So an easy step, make sure that you subscribe to this YouTube channel because more videos will be posted in the future. Also, get onto the BC Silviculture Surveyor email distribution list if you're not already. I use it to email about changes or to ask for feedback. Also, make sure that you're on an annual basis downloading and printing the latest version of the manual in the What's New document. You always want to give the manual a solid scan, and you need to carefully review the What's New document. You also want to make sure that you're downloading the latest version of the FS660. It gets updated pretty regularly. You also want to make sure that you always have the latest version of SNAP and SAP on your tablet. If you're a paper card user, or if you want backup, you also want to make sure that you have the latest cards from the Crown's printer. For 2023, those should be ready any day, so check out their shop. Then maybe you want to get formal survey training. You can sign up for one of the courses listed on the last slide. You can also reach out to the instructors if you're interested in more advanced training. For example, they're willing to offer 1 or 2 day training sessions on the alternative survey methods. I'd also recommend attending forest health training when available, or if available, with your local government pathologist or entomologist. If they aren't currently offering sessions, pressure them to organize one. And then lastly, ecology training. Similar to the pathologist, entomologist, there's regional ecologists and soil scientists, and they are willing to put on training if there's a need. So reach out. All right, we've now finished all the major sections of the manual, and I'll just quickly review a handful of changes to the appendices. Appendix 1 is the glossary. I removed outdated terms that weren't referenced anywhere within the manual. I tweaked some terms to align with regulation, and I added a handful of terms. Now, the terms to actually pay attention to are germinants, plant, fill plant, and replant. Germinants ties in with your true tallies by species, so it's clearly important. The planting definitions will tie in with the updated REES documents when they get published. There was a wide range of interpretation of these technique codes, and it was impacting growth and yield modeling, appraisal, and silviculture effectiveness monitoring. They really needed to be standardized. I have a detailed presentation on the upcoming results reporting changes coming out very soon. In it, I provide many examples of how the technique codes will be applied, so stay tuned for that. Appendix 3 has references and links to a lot of useful resources for a surveyor. A huge chunk of the links were broken, but they should all be live and working again in the 2023 Surveys Manual. The old Appendix 13 is now known as Appendix 8. The only change is to the coastal TSAs associated with the coast region. All right, we also had to make some deletions. The forest cover map legend section still had the old legend, so that was removed. I also cut the magnetic declination and annual change appendix. It was very short and mostly involved broken links. Similarly, I cut the field cards and forums appendix. Almost all of the links were broken. You can still search for them on the Forums Index website. I removed the crown closure, free grind damage criteria for coniferous trees, and broadleaf damage criteria appendices because they are all found in the FS660. I also removed the FS660 because you can download and print it from the survey's website. I apologize if that's an inconvenience, but I really needed to make the manual a more workable size. It wasn't opening on my laptop without crashing. And that is it for this video. The next video in the series covers section 7, data collection, and 8, data compilation, where the majority of the procedural changes have happened. So that is the key video to watch. So take a break, grab a coffee, and watch it when you're fresh. If you have any questions or suggestions, please reach out. My email is on the slide, and it's also at the start of the surveys manual. I'd be happy to chat.